And now let's meet my next guest. This is the creative editor of ARC.UA magazine, Mark Suprun. Hello and welcome to Spotlight Ukraine.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, we're here to ruin the Russian fakes, and this week, Putin, the president of Russia, he spoke a lot, and predominantly he did that in his traditional militant rhetoric. So, to whom did he appeal for in this manner?
Well, I think his primary audience was probably twofold. Number one, it was to ensure some sort of domestic support, but I think many of the messages, at least what I saw, were directed towards a Western audience, primarily when he mentioned that Russia was ready to suspend the START treaty, that was really directed toward those interests in the United States or in the West, not just the United States, that are frankly very concerned about they're very sensitive to the notion of nuclear escalation. Frankly, it's a canard. It's something that the Kremlin and Putin himself have been using for a long time. I don't think that it's going to have any serious effect in policy circles, be it in Washington, D.C., Ottawa, or London. However, it did get a lot of traction in the English language press. I know, for example, Canadian press covered the issue quite extensively, as did other publications like Washington Times. Like the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. I don't think that it's going to have any serious effect on the policy or the decisions that are made around sending continued military assistance to Ukraine.
But knowing this fact, why does the Russian propaganda work much less in Ukraine comparing to the other countries of the world? Because these countries also have like democratic states. Is it still working on them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I really thought about that. And in Ukraine, I think what happened, and this is really thanks to the decision by the National Security and Defense Council to take the license away from the pro-Kremlin channels that Medvedchuk was in charge of. And I think that decision is going to be in the future regarded as a very critical decision in Ukraine's ability to unify. I think that was a very serious effort, judging by the previous 8 years of Russia's disinformation tsunamis against the Ukrainian population to divide Ukrainians. And that decision was very, very smart, both strategically and tactically. And I think following that, Ukrainians have been exposed to disinformation for so many years that I frankly believe the media literacy in Ukraine is far higher than what you would see in the West, at least vis-a-vis Russian disinformation operations. I think that it's changing now. I think some of the disinformation narratives have been so ridiculous. For example, I was told by a couple of friends in London that no one believes in the denazification, nor do they believe in the desatanization of Ukraine as strategic goals. And frankly, I suspect that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also doesn't believe that these are strategic goals that are somewhat even remotely attainable. But I think the simple answer to your question is that media literacy in Ukraine is really on the rise, and it's very hard to fool Ukrainians.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. But is there any logic in inventing the narratives about the United States involving into the war, about the nuclear threats, about the mobilization of Ukrainians in Great Britain? What is the logic in doing this or that?
Yeah, that's another good question. You know, there were certain targets or certain purposes to Russian disinformation. Primarily, one was to solidify their domestic audience. But on the international front, there's really, in my opinion, there are three key components that they're trying to stop or to influence. Number one is the military component. Yep. Number two is the unity. And the third is to inject a whole bunch of doubt. We used to call that in the to show you how old I am, back in the early days of the internet, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And those are sort of the strategic goals of Russian disinformation, to put a stop, or at least to slow down military assistance and military cooperation between Ukraine and its partners,
Yep.
to break the unity of the Western Front. And again, that's really thanks in large part to Ukraine's diplomatic activity, the diplomatic, for lack of to stay within the military metaphor, the diplomatic front. They've done an outstanding job in keeping the Western world, especially EU. I mean, you look at Ramstein, we have 54 countries now that are members of Ramstein, together and united and focused on putting an end to Russian aggression in Ukraine. Particularly, I'd like to suggest to remind everyone that it wasn't so long ago. I know that we all have great respect for Boris Johnson, but it wasn't too long ago where he caused a bit of a row back in 2016, I think it was, just before the Brexit election. He was sort of hinting that maybe the EU had something to do with the annexation of Crimea. And for that, he was called an apologist in London. Russian oligarchs have put huge amounts of resources to buy influence in the United Kingdom. So when you consider that the United Kingdom is number one in supporting, at least one of the top three in supporting military aid to Ukraine,
yep,
that's a big testament to the work of the diplomatic corps, particularly, for example, Ambassador Pristaiko. He's done an outstanding job, I think, in keeping the Ukraine-UK coalition or alliance together. It's really impressive to see. And the third is to inject doubt, really just to put doubt that Ukrainians can actually reestablish sovereignty to the 1991 borders, which I think is completely realistic today. And it's no longer in doubt, frankly. And those three targets of Russian disinformation are really the point. And frankly, I think the Kremlin is losing.
Yeah, we all hope for that. Thank you so much for being the guest to Spotlight Ukraine and trying to ruin the fakes made by the Russian propaganda machine. Mark Suprun, the creative editor of ARC.UA, and we continue. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.